Co-host over at Hill TV's Rising, Krystal recently went on CNN to talk a little bit about the Iowa Caucus debacle. I want to show you a clip of that, and then we're going to come back and talk about it.
Now, in addition to what Kate was saying, leaning into questioning whether or not the results will ultimately be fair, there are supporters of Bernie Sanders who've done the same thing. All you have to do is go on social media last night, and there are people spinning theories that somehow Iowa was going to be good for Bernie Sanders, so they decided to spike the results overnight. These are the theories that are floating out there with just no proof at all this morning.
Well, and you can't really blame them when you watch the way the process unfolded last time. And the DNC did put their thumb on the scales for Hillary Clinton. That was revealed in some of the internal leaks that came out. And you had a poll that happened to get spiked on Saturday that happened to be good for Bernie Sanders. And then this result looks like it would have been good for Bernie Sanders, and that doesn't come out as well. So you can't really blame them for being suspicious of party officials who have no use for them or for their movement. But I don't want to miss what should be probably the big headline today. I mean, judging by the posture of Kate Bedingfield in your interview, not only talking about calling into question the results, but also saying, look, it's a long road ahead. Let's look towards South Carolina and Nevada. And also the posture of some of the other supporters around the Biden campaign and what we saw from the entry results and the anecdotal reports on the ground. It looks like the bottom could very well be dropping out of the Biden campaign. He really needed to do well in Iowa in order to fundraise. I mean, this is a guy who, even though he's been the front runner in the polls, has not had the numbers to back that up. You're talking about going on to states like California, states like Texas, where you need a massive ground game and a lot of money. This is not going to get it done for him. So that firewall, which already seemed to be shrinking rapidly, may be in real trouble for the purported frontrunner here.
Now, technically, she was making those statements before any of the actual results came out from Iowa. We do have some of the results now, but regardless, her main point is absolutely correct, and especially when she's saying that, hey, look, she doesn't blame anyone who has conspiracies at this point. I'm 100% on board with that. I'm not necessarily completely sold that it was an absolute conspiracy, but, you know, if that is your view, you're 100% justified at this point, 100% justified, because at the very least, the DNC, the Hillary Clinton establishment, has no interest whatsoever in trying to bring Sanders supporters in and making things more transparent. The whole thing with the app was, oh, this app is going to let us be more transparent. We're going to, allow the Iowa caucus to be more transparent by having these multiple numbers reported. First of all that does is allow multiple people to claim victory in Iowa, undermining the importance of Iowa in the first place. So just as a decision from the Iowa DNC, it didn't even make sense from their own point of view. But regardless of that, I mean, the whole thing was so ridiculous, because when it came to the actual app itself, which was supposed to bring transparency, what did they do, right? We come to find out apparently Hillary Clinton staffers were involved with the creation of the app. And then we find out that Pete Buttigieg campaign gave 40 grand to the whole app thing itself. The name of the app is literally Shadow, or the name of the app creator is literally Shadow. Like, I mean, it's out of a movie. It's literally out of a movie. I mean, I don't blame anyone who has any kind of conspiracies at this point. It's completely ridiculous. And that's not it, because you'll remember leading up to Iowa, all the polls were showing Sanders was up ahead, and that Des Moines Register poll, that gold standard poll, which is known to even influence the election sometimes because it's so high quality of a poll, it was likely to show Sanders in the lead because the one previously had shown Sanders in the lead. And by the way, the leaked version of the poll did show Sanders in the lead, and that he had gained even more ground from the last time when he was in the lead. So, right. So that poll was spiked, and they weren't going to bring it in because of a complaint from the Pete Buttigieg campaign. And then we come to find out, then the results get spiked and get messed up. And then Pete Buttigieg, when they did release the results, Pete Buttigieg is slightly ahead in the state delegate count, but Buttigieg lost significantly in the first vote alignment, and then lost even in the second vote alignment from the data that we have so far. As of me recording, they have about 70% reporting, so there's still 30% to go, so things could still change, but they didn't really even, when they came out with the results, they didn't even give us a clear, information about why they were releasing the information that they were releasing. The best that I could find, and I did try to dig up, I didn't just jump to the conclusion that they were doing this to screw Bernie. I really did try to dig in and find out, what was the sort of systematic reason for why they were releasing the particular data sets that they were releasing. apparently the best, this is the best I could find, is they wanted to make sure that they had data from at least one precinct from every county, and they were only releasing precinct data which they could, double and triple verify. So that's like a slight, like, okay, I understand that, but at the very, you already screwed up the data. You should have waited until you had 100% of the thing. And by the way, I'm not just complaining about this because I'm a Sanders supporter and it showed Buttigieg leading in the state delegate count, and and Sanders was winning in the other delegate count. Although I am upset at the mainstream media for literally only talking about the state delegate count when, I mean, you can also make the case that, like, well, Sanders won in the other two counts, but anytime you Google, like, oh, who won Iowa or whatever, it's just showing Pete Buttigieg, or no one's talking about the other state results. But regardless, look, it's disappointing. It's outrageous to anyone, right? Because of the fact that, look, if, say, Buttigieg won fair and square, like, at this point, I don't know, and you don't know either. Nobody really knows if he won fair and square because we don't have all the results, and there's plenty of reason to think that there might have been some kind of weird conspiracy going on. I don't even know, right? But let's say he did win, then this is bad for him. And I don't necessarily feel bad for Pete Buttigieg. I'm not like, I don't really like him, but I do feel bad for his staffers, right? And I think that's fair because, people give up so much of their time, so much of their energy to go work for a campaign which they believe in. And even if I don't necessarily agree with those staffers, agree with many of those, there are a lot of good faith people working for the Buttigieg campaign who like Buttigieg genuinely. And so they put in their hard work, their time, oftentimes money, to work for Buttigieg. And then if Buttigieg got spiked, and obviously same thing for Bernie Sanders, tons and tons of people working for Bernie Sanders for up to a year. And then now to have this whole absolute spike come in, I mean, it's so ridiculous. And another reason, by the way, to be suspicious that this could be, I mean, we just saw this report. I think this was this was January 31st that this came out, was that DNC members were discussing a rule change in order to allow superdelegates to vote on the first ballot instead of the second ballot in order to, screw over Bernie Sanders in case he would ultimately win this thing. Now, technically, this article here, the interesting thing about this article, so William Owen here is the person who leaked it, and he was a Clinton superdelegate, so it's not like he's on our side. And also, he did oppose the rule change, opposed changing the rules so that superdelegates could only have a second ballot thing. He wanted more superdelegate support. However, he did leak this, and if you actually look at it, he declined to identify the members who were sending the text message, but he did show the text message to the press. So you can sort of read this actually. You could actually read this leak as a threat because William Owen, he's like a DNC guy, I think from like Tennessee or whatever. Again, he's not a Bernie guy, but he has come out multiple times saying that he would not support a mid-cycle rule change. He's like, if we're going to change the rules, we should wait. So you in a sense, you could actually read this article as him threatening people who are trying to change the rules. So it's kind of a weird situation where obviously he's not a Bernie guy, but he does sort of he is very opposed to changing the rules mid-cycle. So even the fact that this is coming out of as a leak, you could argue like, hey, look, yes, obviously we're not happy. We're obviously not happy that there are people in the DNC who are trying to change the rules. Although, what did we expect? But there also are people in the DNC who are fighting the possibility of there being a rule change. So even if we don't necessarily ideologically agree with, William Owen, for example, or some of the people in the DNC who are, fighting against changing the rules mid-cycle to screw over Sanders, they are in that case, sort of more or less sort of fighting for us. Now, looking at some of these popular vote totals here, so these are the popular vote totals, and actually some of these are actually quite interesting. And well, I'll get to it. So Bernie Sanders actually didn't grow his lead from the first alignment to the second alignment nearly as much as Pete Buttigieg. It was really a lot of the sort of centrist establishment candidates really coalesced around Pete Buttigieg. And Joe Biden here, you see, this is absolutely terrible. Absolutely, absolutely terrible for him. Not only just his first showing at only 16,000, but the fact that he lost votes in his alignment. There are a lot of areas where he didn't even reach that 15% threshold in order to make viability in the caucuses. And, I mean, that is really, really terrible for him. And I mean, Amy Klobuchar as well, although that's obviously a little bit less surprising. She did lose support. And the other thing that was really interesting about the results, now, obviously, we don't have all of the results yet. So this is all tentative. And, I wasn't even super sure about making this video for that reason. But who knows when we're going to get the results? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be later today? Is it going to be next week? I don't know. But, the other thing that was really interesting is Yang, actually. I wasn't able to refine the chart, but Yang lost voters. He lost something like 4,000 voters. He had about a little bit over 5,000 overall, and then it went down. But he, from sort of the first alignment to the second alignment, because there were a number of sites which did not make viability. Obviously, Sanders didn't seem to pick up a whole lot of Yang supporters. So that theory, which even I had suggested would be likely, was clearly wrong. So I was clearly wrong about that a lot of Yang supporters would go over to Sanders. I mean, I think part of the reason why Sanders didn't gain as much as some of the others, such as, for instance, Buttigieg, is look, if you're a Sanders supporter, you're with Sanders at this point, especially with some of the more polarizing negative media coverage, which we got more recently with the Joe Rogan incident, with the Elizabeth Warren thing. It kind of polarized Sanders. So, one of the things which, like, if you looked at the more recent morning consult polls leading up into Iowa, Sanders' favorability, obviously he was still the most favorable candidate, but his the unfavorable view did go up a little bit, and he did take about a step back in terms of favorability, even while he was surging in the polls. And I mean, I sort of mentioned this in one of my videos, but I guess I didn't fully make the connection itself. Is that means that Sanders, in some sense, became slightly more polarizing, which may have, I mean, again, this is sort of speculation, and again, we don't have all the data yet. That could mean that ultimately, sort of, what went on there was a lot of people were, look, if you're with Sanders, you're with Sanders, and if you're not, you're maybe not with Sanders as much. And when it came to Elizabeth Warren, Elizabeth Warren in a lot more areas was viable. And so that did sort of split a bit of the progressive vote. And it's also unclear, by the way, I don't have enough data yet because a lot of the precincts aren't reporting. It's unclear how much of the Warren vote did split off from Sanders' vote. There seems to be kind of evidence on both sides over whether or not Warren did kind of split from Sanders, or was splitting more some of the establishment voters. So it's actually still unclear. One thing that is clear, though, is Biden is in big trouble in terms of fundraising. I mean, these kinds of results are not what Joe Biden wants, especially when you look going into New Hampshire. So this is the RCP average for New Hampshire. You can see Bernie Sanders absolutely in the lead, killing it now. And we also have an Emerson poll out here with Sanders with a 15-point lead. That is absolutely insane, a 15-point lead. Now, to be fair, Emerson polls in the past have been more favorable to Sanders than some of the other polls, so we don't want to sit here and be like, oh, this is the definitive poll, because, you always have to look sort of at the aggregate. But regardless, Sanders does seem to be having a significant lead in here. The question and the thing we're going to want to look out for is, will Pete Buttigieg, so this is Buttigieg here in the kind of purple magenta, I guess, I don't know. Will Buttigieg take, or how much of a bump will he get from Iowa? Clearly, with this sort of mishap, this massive debacle with the data results, it's clearly not going to give him the kind of bump that he would have otherwise if he actually won in the first place, because we don't know, because we don't have all the data, right? So will Buttigieg be able to take a, kind of step up a bit? And the fact that it does seem like he lost the popular vote, so that probably would have subtracted from it in any case. So, what kind of bump can Buttigieg expect? And will Biden underperform the polls? Because again, I guess I don't have it pulled up here, but Biden was expected to do much better than he did, even on the first alignment. Some of the polls were showing Biden at like 20% or the like, and to have him even on the first alignment here at only 16,000. In any case, Biden didn't do nearly as well as he needed to do. Biden was really underperforming the polls much more than he would have needed to. And so the question is, will Joe Biden also underperform the polls in New Hampshire? If he does, honestly, his campaign is in a lot of trouble. Now, who knows what's going to happen in Nevada? Will we have another disaster? Apparently, though, the Nevada Democratic Party is saying that they will not use the same app that that they will not be using the shadow vendor, because shadow is so is controversial at this point. Now, the other thing I want to show you is, so this is the sort of needle from the New York Times. So this is kind of predicting who ultimately is going to win. Now, I saw this earlier. I think they're saying that Buttigieg has something like, at this point, mathematically, something like an 80% chance of ultimately still winning the pledged delegates. Sanders is likely to win the final, and definitely very, very certain to win the first vote count in Iowa. So, it's a little bit debatable here. Now, the interesting thing, though, to look at here is actually a lot of these counties up here. Let me switch it to this way. So a lot of these counties over here actually were kind of Obama to Trump counties. And it does seem like Pete Buttigieg seems to be outperforming even Bernie Sanders in these Obama to Trump counties. Now, this is something which I was surprised by, and something which in one of my videos, I even said that I didn't think that this was going to happen. But, clearly the evidence does seem to be against my sort of pre-held beliefs in at least this instance. The thing, though, is obviously Pete Buttigieg doesn't ultimately have like a clear path to the nomination, with him polling so poorly among people of color. New Hampshire really is his last he's way, way down in New Hampshire. It's almost impossible that he's going to win. He would have to get, at this point, over a 10-point bump from Iowa, and it would be incredibly unlikely. Sanders is very, very incredibly likely to win New Hampshire, which, by the way, since Iowa had a massive debacle, it'll likely be like previous instances where Iowa was a kind of split decision, and it sort of increases the weight of New Hampshire. So some people are arguing that ultimately that's going to be good for Bernie Sanders, but the question will be, obviously, well, what I'm saying is Buttigieg doesn't have a clear path to the nomination, but it is clear, and there have been studies to show this, Bernie outperforms Biden in terms of in terms of Obama to Trump counties. So the argument that Bernie is still more electable in those Obama to Trump counties still would seem to hold. And obviously, this is only one Midwestern state. It's unclear whether or not Buttigieg would outperform Bernie in Obama to Trump counties across the country. That does seem to be unlikely. But what does seem to be the case is that Buttigieg was able to sort of coalesce around a lot more of those centrist and establishment voters. And that does seem to be why he was able to pull that off. Because even in some of those first alignment instances, Sanders was still outperforming Buttigieg. And obviously, most of the country being that they're primaries and not caucuses, we wouldn't sort of have that result. So it's a bit more split, and it's not like there were some people going around like saying that, oh, this destroys, like some people, especially in the mainstream media, were saying that, this evidence, this minimal evidence, which we don't even have all the vote shares for, from one Midwestern state that isn't even representative of the whole country, that, this evidence sort of completely destroys the possibility of Bernie Sanders, the sort of myth that Bernie Sanders is electable. That's not the case at all. We don't have evidence for that. But it does seem to be that Buttigieg is doing better than we might have, that even I initially expected. He did clearly outperform his polls in a number of areas. So anyway, it's clearly a mess. I did just want to show you that clip from Krystal Ball and then talk a little bit about it. In any case, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.